Today, the topic is exception handling in Java. A Java exception is an object that describes an exceptional condition, that is errors, that has occurred in a piece of code. You can also call it is a condition that caused by runtime error. So what is runtime error? A runtime error is dividing an integer by 0. Now, when an exceptional condition arises, an object representing that exception is created in Java and thrown in the method that is caused the error. If the exception object is not caught and handled properly, the interpreter display an error message. So, whenever there is a runtime error or an exception arises, an object that represents the exception is thrown, and if the exception is not properly handled, the interpreter will display an error message. So, we must give some try-catch block to handle this exception. Java exception handling managed via some concepts like try, catch, throw, throws, and finally. You can think of in that diagram there is a try block. In the try block, the exception has occurred, and in the catch block we handle the exception. Try block, we throw the exception object to the catch block and we take necessary measures for properly handling the exception in the catch block. Now, this is the example of a try-catch block. So, in the try block, you should write the statements that generates an exception, and in the catch block the statements process the exception, that is handles the exception. And when you write the catch statement, you should specify the exception type and the exception object. So this is the block structure of try-catch statement. So now there are two examples of exceptions. One is arithmetic exception. Arithmetic exception is caused by math errors, and IO exception is caused by general IO failures. So many types of exceptions are there. That is, file not found exception is there, array index out of bound exception is there, null pointer exception is there. So we will discuss these types of exceptions in the next class. So now we are trying to define the try block. The try block is likely to cause an error condition and throw an exception. So we must write some statement in the try block that causes an exception. Try block can have one or more statements. If any one statement generates an exception, the remaining statements in the block are skipped and execution jumps to catch block. So if there are more than one statement in try block and any one statement generates an exception, the remaining statements are not executed and the execution jumps to the catch block. We can have also nested try blocks in a program. Now what is catch block? A catch block is defined by the keyword catch. It catches the exception thrown by the try block. It is added immediately after try block. It specifies the exception type that you wish to catch. More than one catch block may be possible. The catch block is called according to the exception type. So, more than one catch block possible. If there are more than one catch block is there, the catch block which matches the exception is called. Now we are trying to define the exception hierarchy. So you should know that exception is a child class of throwable class. Throwable class is the root class of all exceptions. So throwable class can have two child classes, one exception class, one error class. Exception class has different child classes like runtime exception, IO exception, interrupted exception. Runtime exception can be subclassed into arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, index out of bounds exception, etc. Index out of bound exception can have child classes like array index out of bound, string index out of bound. Likewise, IO exception class has child classes like EOF, that is end of file exception, file not found exception, etc. So this is a partially completed exception hierarchy. You must know that throwable is the root class for all the exceptions, and exception class can be divided into number of subclasses or child classes, and each child class must have many subclasses. So this is the partial hierarchy of exception.